Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear Kardec Radio listener. We are here live on this very special day. It's a day that we are all thinking about the transformations of our planet Earth and the transformations of ourselves as well. The show is about the science of forgiveness. Can you believe it? There is a science that proves to us there is important features in forgiveness that impact in our health. And to bring the understanding on the science of forgiveness, we're going to bring to the show the dear professor of the University of Maryland, Lydia Temoshok. Lydia Temoshok has a major project as a principal investigator on the biopsychosocial mediators of HIV progression, and she studies the mind-body connections of emotions, especially in forgiveness, and we're going to learn a lot with her. She has also been at a spiritist event in Maryland in 2010 with Divaldo Franco when he actually awarded her the Peace and You Award because she is the leading authority on the science of forgiveness. Lydia Temoshok is with us, and she's going to be brought in very soon. For many of you who are asking, where's Kardec Radio? How can we listen to it? You can listen to it, kardecradio.com, blogtalkradio/Kardec Radio, and you can also listen through your iPhone, BlackBerry. You can go to our website and we explain to you how easy it is. And if you've missed the show, very easy, go to iTunes and you can freely download all these shows. You can also listen to the shows on demand in our website, kardecradio.com or blogtalkradio.com/Kardec Radio. Fascinating because Kardec Radio is everywhere and elsewhere. There are more than 40 countries with Kardec Radio listeners, and in the United States alone, we have Kardec Radio listeners in more than 39 states. If you are out there, all you need to do is spread the good news because Kardec Radio is here to stay with you, sharing the good and interesting aspect of life, spirituality, and this is why Kardec Radio is here. Today, the show is about forgiveness. Forgiveness is so important, but it's not easy. We're still learning it. Forgiveness, as in the Spirit's book by Allan Kardec, is put as a feature of our charitable move into life. When he asked, what can we understand of charity? The answer of the Spirits was that we should be benevolent towards everyone. We should also be indulgent, meaning we needed to be kind to people in their imperfections and also be forgiving of the offenses of others. Can you believe it? Forgiveness as a feature of charity. People think that charity is something that you give money, almsgiving, but it's much more than that. Charity is loving action, and forgiving is a big part of it. So for you who has never heard about the story on Chico Xavier, there was a time in which he had a dog, great Brazilian medium. He had a dog, and the dog was getting old and was getting sick. And one day, it just so happened that one of his neighbors, a lady, she felt compelled to resolve an issue that was more in her mind than on Chico Xavier's. Because Chico Xavier was not bothered that the dog was sick and old, but she was. She felt that he had so many things to take care of that, taking care of a sick and old dog was a lot of burden. So she decided on her own to take the life of the dog, believe it or not. How many people are like this? They just assume things on their own and they take action, and sometimes take action on somebody else's life's decisions, and that's what she did. Chico Xavier was distraught in his heart. He missed his companion. He loved dogs. He loved the company of a dog. As faithful as they are, he needed it as well because he is a human being, and he kept this resentment inside of him. Not on purpose, just a natural consequence of this frustration. So one day he was at the Spiritist Center. He was doing his spiritual work, the mediumistic practice on psychographing, when the spirit mentor Emmanuel stopped by and asked him, Chico, what's going on here? And he said, what do you mean? Your resentment is vibrating and disturbing the work that is happening here. So you need to resolve it. You need to clean up your heart and forgive. And then he said, I don't know how. And he was a loving mind. But we are humans, my friends. We are humans. We are here to learn to be real human beings. We're not here to learn to be angels. We're still in the process from being animals into human beings. So that's the focus. The focus is to be human, and Chico Xavier was learning himself as well. So Emmanuel suggested, as all good and evolved spiritual mentors, he said, the best way for you to learn and forgive and get rid of your resentment is make sure that you find out what she wants best in her life. Buy it, surprise her with it, and give it to her. Chico Xavier didn't have enough money to buy anything for himself, imagine for somebody else, but he found out that she needed a sewing machine. He found a way to save money, and he was very obedient to his mentor, as all good mediums are. They are not stubborn in the face of their guidance. So he saved money, bought her a new sewing machine, and actually, he knocked on her door and surprised her with that amazing gift. She was astounded with it. And she was so surprised that she hugged him with so much love and gratitude that after he left, he felt that his heart was cleaned up from that resentment. And then Emmanuel came along, the spirit mentor, and explained. He said, you know what happened? When she emitted that energy of gratitude, that erased your feelings of resentment. There you go, my friends. What an advice. Are we ready to do the same? Can you imagine somebody wrongs you and you go there and give them just like what Jesus said? This is the spiritual science of forgiveness. We want to know more about the material science of forgiveness. We want to know more, and that's why we have here with us Dr. Lydia Temoshok. She's going to be with us in a few minutes, and before we get her, we want to enlighten ourselves a little more to prepare for the science of forgiveness that Dr. Temoshok is going to bring to us by an understanding on the book by Allan Kardec, Heaven and Hell. In the first part, chapter 7, he explains to us that forgiveness is an act of grace in itself. It doesn't annul the wrong, but it's a blessing. How is it a blessing? We're going to learn more. Science is here to join forces with the spiritual science of Spiritism and enlighten our lives. Before we bring Dr. Temoshok with us, we're going to play for you a piece that probably you've never heard. These days, we're thinking about the great acts of great people, especially in America. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the memorial that is going to be open very soon, and the great actions of this man and how he was inspiring the great president of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln himself had a great experience in forgiveness. And this is a story that was published in issue 9 of the Spiritist magazine. In October 2010, you can access the Spiritist magazine at www.spiritistmagazine.com. You can buy its digital form, because now we're digital only, because we're eco-friendly and because we need to give it a boost beyond the paper in itself. So you can get there and access to this amazing account that was brought in the 20th century by a spiritualist medium. Listen to the story, how compelling it is, and the great example of forgiveness from our dear President Abraham Lincoln.
Lincoln and his murderer in the spirit realm. Analysis of Lincoln's communication obtained through the medium of Ravenswood. When Lincoln came back from his state of confusion and woke up in the spirit world, he was very surprised and disturbed because he had no idea he had died. The shooting that hit him instantaneously suspended his sensations. He did not understand what had happened to him. This mental confusion, however, did not last long. He was truly a spiritualist to understand death, and like many other people, he was not surprised by the new reality to which he had been transported. He saw himself surrounded by many people who he knew had been long deceased, and he soon got to know the cause of his death. He was cordially received by many people for whom he had great sympathy. He felt the appreciation for him, and, at a glance, he was able to embrace the happy world which he entered. At that very moment, he experienced an anguishing feeling related to the pain that his family should be going through, as well as great anxiety due to the possible consequences of his death to his country. His thoughts abruptly brought him back to earth. Becoming aware of the fact that William Booth had been mortally wounded, he went to him and bowed down over his deathbed. At that moment, Lincoln had recovered his perfect consciousness and his peace of mind, and he calmly awaited Booth's awakening into the spiritual life. Booth was not surprised by death, because he was already awaiting it. The first spirit he met was Lincoln. Booth looked at Lincoln as if he were proud of the act he had committed. However, Lincoln's feelings towards Booth didn't harbor any idea of vengeance. On the contrary, he was serene and kind without any trace of animosity. Booth could not stand the situation, and he left upset. The act he committed had several motives. First, he lacked reasoning, which led him to believe he had committed a meritorious act. And secondly, his unrestrained love for praise persuaded him that he would be acclaimed as a martyr. After wandering around, he felt himself attracted once more to Lincoln. At times he felt repentant. At other times, his pride blocked him from making amends. He understood, however, how much his pride was in vain, especially when he learned that he could not hide any of the feelings that shook him the way he could when he was alive. Also, his thoughts of pride, shame, or remorse are known by those who surround him. Always in the presence of his victim, and receiving from him nothing but signs of kindness, this is his current state and his punishment. As for Lincoln, his happiness surpasses what he could have expected. Allan Kardec's comment: the status of these two spirits, from all perspectives, is in agreement with all the examples reported to us daily from beyond. It is perfectly rational and relates exactly to the character of both individuals. This article was extracted from the newspaper Banner of Light of Boston in 1865 to 1866 and published in the Revue Spirit of Paris, with a special note from the renowned Allan Kardec. The Banner of Light was a weekly, an exponent of the spiritual philosophy of the 19th century in Boston, Massachusetts.
And you, dear listener, you can also access this whole article that was republished in the Spiritist magazine in the issue 9, October 2010. Just go to thespiritistmagazine.com. You can either buy the digital version or you can subscribe to it, because now the Spiritist magazine is digital only, because we need to go more eco-friendly, and also we needed to help the International Spiritist Council get greater funds, because they are in great need of funds to do the amazing projects that they are proposing. You can go to their website at intercei.com. intercei.com. Go there and access. So as you heard it, we had this amazing story about President Lincoln in the afterlife, how compelling it is, the message that he found himself there. We all know that he had seances in his White House at the time he was a president. And before the Emancipation Proclamation, he had this great medium, Mrs. Mignard, who was bringing a message that he had to do what he had to do. He needed to unite the country once and for all and free ourselves from the crimes of slavery. That's the reality. We're talking about forgiveness here, the science of forgiveness, the spiritual science, the material science of forgiveness. And we have with us in our show Dr. Temoshok. She's going to be with us very soon. And when we hear the compelling story of Lincoln and Booth, we learn that pride is all that separates us from giving this step into forgiveness. And when we talk about forgiveness, we are also talking about self-forgiveness, right? Because self-forgiveness is so important. If we don't know how to forgive ourselves, how are we going to forgive others? And to forgive is, let's say, a feature of a loving action mode. We say charity. In the Spirit's book, we've talked about this very question. And when you talk about charity, forgiveness is one of the features of charity. In the book Heaven and Hell, Part 1, Chapter 7, Kardec explains to us the ladder of transformation has 3 levels. The first one is to repent. And repent is nothing about punishing yourself. It's just the shift in consciousness, in the awareness. You were walking one path, you change it. Big deal. Then it's not done. You need to go another step. Sometimes we suffer through this realization because we realize the damage we've done with ourselves and others, which we call in Spiritism expiation. It's atonement. And then it's not enough because you shift your consciousness, just like simple. You know you weren't walking the path of enlightenment, and then you figure it out and you suffer, you atone, you expiate because you feel you created damage around. And then third, we need to do the reparation. Reparation is this feeling that we are going to build in a new thing. And in that regard, when we talk about it, we really need to be fully aware that we are here to grow. Just a note for all of us. The Spirit Society of Baltimore tonight is promoting a special talk to relieve our hearts from the distress of this watch on the Irene hurricane. If we want to know more, the reasons why this is happening, spiritually speaking, tune in. We're going to have a special talk at 6 p.m. If you're far away, cannot come at the SSB Center in Baltimore, Maryland, you can watch us live at ssbaltimore.org/webcast, and you can watch the whole explanation and the consoling teachings on the reasons why this is happening to all of us. We're going to give a short break and come back to finally bring in our dear and guest, Dr. Lydia Temoshok.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Join us every Thursday live. Evolution in Two Worlds, a journey of the soul through the teachings of the Spirit Doctor, Andrea Luiz. Connect at www.tvcei.com, Channel 2.
And now we return to our program.
Dear Kardec Radio listener, we are here and everywhere and elsewhere in the world. We are already in 40 countries. It hasn't been yet 2 months of existence, and the spirits know better. It's a very inspirational show. We have many amazing guests, and amongst them, we are honored to have here with us to tell us more about the science of forgiveness, the great research, the pioneering efforts of Dr. Lydia Temoshok. She's also the awardee of the Peace and You Award. Dr. Temoshok is here with us directly from Maryland. Hi, Dr. Temoshok. Thank you for joining Kardec Radio.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you. We are too. And how are you prepared for Irene?
Well, I have 6 llamas and 2 dogs and a teenage son, and we've been following all of the directions on CNN of what to do in terms of getting water ready and preparing for things. So I'm doing the best I can.
Great, Dr. Temoshok. And we are here we want to get to know more. How did you get interested and driven to this field of research on emotions and health, what we call the psychoneuroimmunology?
Actually, it occurred when I was a child, and I was very interested in looking at some of my relatives. I had some aunts who developed cancer fairly early, and I was trying to understand what made some people develop cancer or other diseases and other people stay healthy. Now, a lot of those factors are, of course, genetic, and even as a child, I was understanding that there are some of those connections with just what you inherit. However, it seemed as if there were some behavioral differences, and that's what I began observing. The field of psychoneuroimmunology really didn't start to take off until the 60s and late 70s, and that's when the science connecting these observations that people have been making for years, starting with the Greeks and Aristotle, of understanding the connections between the mind and the body, trying to put a scientific evidentiary base to what people have been observing for centuries.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And in previous shows, we had Dr. Stephen Post also talking to us about how the childhood experiences can impact so greatly, preparing us for these pioneering efforts such as yourself in this field. For our listener here, your main field of research nowadays is mostly on emotions and health in HIV patients, right?
Yes, I have done for the last, I guess, since the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, since 1983, have been trying to look at how emotions, health, coping with stress in particular can interact with body processes, physiology, the immune system, to potentially contribute to either a better health outcome or a worse health outcome than would otherwise be predicted in terms of behavior alone. But simultaneous with that, I've also been looking at that in terms of relationships with cancer, specifically malignant melanoma. So both of them are immune-connected disorders, cancer and HIV/AIDS, and I think they have a lot of similarities in terms of how these mind-body connections can work.
Mind and body connections. But I bet it hasn't been that long ago that research has received a lot of support in that field, right? You would know better than anybody else the shift in interest by the funding agencies and especially the public support in that regard. Are we right?
Oh, absolutely. In 1992, I published a book through Random House called The Type C Connection, the behavioral links to cancer and your health. Now, Random House doesn't undertake to publish books like that very lightly. They were convinced by the growing body of evidence linking mind, body, in this case, mind and cancer connections. However, that book met with a huge amount of criticism and negative reviews, as were all of the attempts of researchers to really talk about and to spread to the public more some of our research findings. In this book, I summarized a lot of research findings, but as long as it stays within the journals, people were willing to let it rest. But as soon as you start making it more public, then that's when the criticism happened. However, since 1992, there's really been a transformation in the field, and it's really been undeniable in terms of the science of psychoneuroimmunology, the connections between the mind, the brain, the central nervous system, and the immune system, and the outcome of certain diseases.
So when you talk about we're just curious, the negative feedback in that regard, what were the criticisms, in regard to such type of publishing of such findings?
Well, I remember very well there was a very big review in the New York Times of my book, and the criticism was that somehow by saying that the mind is connected to some of the cancer outcomes in terms of the research that I showed, that malignant melanoma, it's a very serious disease, can be influenced either for the better or for the worse in terms of how one copes with it, what I call the type C coping style.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the kind of thrust of the book and talking about the research. And the criticism in the New York Times was saying, well, you're sort of blaming the victim. You're sort of saying, well, here's this person who has cancer, and are you saying that it's because of their personality or the way they cope with things that they got melanoma or they are progressing with melanoma? And that was the furthest thing from what I was saying. I was saying that once you have cancer, in this case malignant melanoma, there are ways of coping with it that will empower you to perhaps shift the balance of mind-body connections in a more favorable direction. Again, you can't change basic biology. You've got cancer going on, you've got your genes going on, you've got maybe environmental factors going on, but there's a lot that one can do to change the balance of the immune system's response to things, and that's influenced by the mind. So you can make a positive impact. It's basically a message of hope for people, saying that you can, through empowering yourself, getting rid of some of the negative energy and the negative ways of coping that are perhaps keeping your balance of energy and your physiological responses producing more of the hormones and the immune responses that are connected to a more unfavorable course of melanoma, shift them in the positive direction. So, and the research that I've done since then has really shown that to be the case. And it's not just me; it's the entire field of psychoneuroimmunology research in both cancer and HIV. And I think it's the preponderance of evidence that's happened in the last 20 years since that book was published that has really kind of silenced the critics in that regard.
So Dr. Temoshok, when you talk nowadays, it's undeniable that emotions impact on our health, and scientific evidence is compelling to that level. But way before these was brought to the scientific realm, there were some books published by several people. Let's say in America, for example, somebody who is not a scientist, but through her observation in works with HIV patients therapeutically, Louise Hay, she published this book, You Can Heal Your Life, and at the end she has a list of diseases and possibility of thought patterns that she says that would be connected to underlying mechanisms of that disease development and the possibility of changing that thought pattern with affirmations. What does science tell us in that regard? Let's say the psychosomatics.
Well, first I would say that certainly science starts with observation, so that even if someone is not conducting scientific studies, which takes years, you need to apply for the grants, you need to get the grants, you need to select your subjects, you need to do all of that work that takes years to show. But people form those hypotheses about the links based on observations, so that anybody who is a good observer of human behavior can make those observations. And I think that people who are not scientists can do that just as well as anyone else. It's just up to the scientists to do the dirty work of testing and showing that. So the next question you had was?
So it's about that list. Many people ask in regard to the mind and body connection, especially in regard to The Underpinning of Emotions and Health, when Louise Hay published that list of diseases and thought patterns that probably are correlated to the underlying mechanisms of that disease development. Is there anything out there in the field of psychoneuroimmunology or psychosomatics in general that already vouches, or is there anyone trying to dig deeper and see the correlations? For example, I'll give an example. I remember a few years ago, as a scientist of pain, reading one of the journals of pain, a group published a compelling paper on the correlation of lower back pain and the people who have a hard time forgiving.
Yes.
You know, so are there other studies out there that would vouch for the recommendations of observations by Louise Hay, for example?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not an expert in the pain field. However, I have included in my research a great deal of the recent evidence on the importance of interleukin-6 and some of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. These are the molecules that are recruited by the body when there's some kind of infection. That's why they're called pro-inflammatory. If there's an infection, if there's some sort of tear in the muscle, if there's some sort of bacterial or other kind of infection, a viral infection. So they do a good job. The problem is that you need to turn those off, those pro-inflammatory cytokines, and you have to turn off those processes when the inflammation is resolved. And what happens in some pain syndromes, and as I'm showing with the problem with this coping style that I call the type C style, and less functional kinds of coping, is that these processes that are biologically helpful don't get turned off. They keep on perseverating. They keep on going on. And that's when damage is caused, because when you keep on having the recruitment of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which does a lot of things. This causes sickness behavior. It makes you feel bad. It's why when you have a cold, you just feel miserable and you feel depressed. And there's a lot of behavioral and emotional sequelae to having these pro-inflammatory cytokines and these inflammatory processes going on. Now, again, they're good if you have an inflammation, but they need to be turned off. How can we operate more functionally so that they're turned off when their job is done? And that's where I think a lot of the research that I've been doing on forgiveness intersects with the research I've been doing on type C and HIV and cancer, to say, how can we turn off those processes when their job is done?
So, Dr. Temoshok, does it mean that there is a best coping type for disease recovery or such a thing? Would you say so?
Well, I think there are styles of coping that are more functional. The type C coping pattern that I've talked about is less favorable in terms of dealing with stresses in the world. It's a maladaptive style of coping with stress. You don't really recognize what's going on. The person has grown up to kind of repress their emotions, not talk about when they're stressed, not talk about when they're angry or depressed. And what happens is the conscious brain is there to help you know how to deal with some of these negative stimuli in the environment. I mean, we have to know when we're undergoing pain. We have to know when there's danger. And our consciousness is there. So if you have a coping style that is repressing that, that's not recognizing it, you can't resolve a situation. So what happens is that the the lower level processes, the less conscious processes, keep on going. They keep on perseverating. They keep on kind of rehashing in this cycle, driving up some of these inflammatory processes, some of these more negative processes that enhance pain over time, that enhance the kind of immune responses. Now, just having a turned-on immune response, that's not always good. It's good if there's a problem, but you need to turn it off. And it's the turning off that this type C style is not good at doing.
Exactly. And when we talk about turning it on and off, we also talk about these difficult diseases that are autoimmune, right?
Exactly.
When the immune system itself is battling inside of your own body.
Exactly. That's an excellent example of what happens when these regulatory processes are becoming dysregulated. And I believe, and some of the research has shown, that the mind, the conscious mind, can intersect in those processes and start to regulate things again. So the body isn't keeping going on producing more and more and more immune processes, which will result in autoimmune diseases if they're not stopped.
Yeah. So, Dr. Temoshok, we are fascinated with some of the findings you've already shared with us. We're going to give a very short break of 40 seconds, and we'll be right back with you. Please give us a minute.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Enrich your spiritual senses and deepen your foundations of Spiritism with the book, What is Spiritism? By Allan Kardec. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
And now we return to our program.
We are here with Dr. Temoshok, and we are learning about the science of forgiveness. Why do we say science of forgiveness? Because forgiveness is not a virtual movement of our emotions or our feelings of our soul. It's actually something so tangible that it has a physiological underpinning. Forgiveness is not only a virtue, it's beyond it. It can have a physiological cascade of events and improve our health. Oh, we want to learn forgiveness. This is the amazing part of emotions and virtues. We're not taught them. We're just advised by society, hopefully by families. There is no school of emotions. So where can you learn about forgiveness? We need to open school of emotions for sure to teach people on exercises of forgiveness and talking about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something that happens in the incarnated life here. It's Kardec Radio, so we want to talk about the teachings of Kardec. And to talk about forgiveness, we need to know that forgiveness, just like President Lincoln, it can happen in the afterlife. When he met Booth, his murderer, in the afterlife, we learned, as we've screened to you at the beginning of the show, that Lincoln taught us a lesson on forgiveness. But it's not only Lincoln. There are other people. Let's see from the other perspective. In the amazing book, Heaven and Hell, Allan Kardec, part 2 of this book, discloses to us on his amazing research with mediums, cases after cases of people who departed to the spiritual realm, deceased people, who came back to tell us how they departed, what's happening in the spiritual realm, from spirits that are happy to, let's say, repentant criminals. So in this case, to make a bridge with the teachings of the science of forgiveness, and also with the case of Lincoln in the afterlife and his experience on forgiveness, we're going to show to you right now. Please listen to this, dear listener. It's the case of a repentant criminal in the afterlife.
An excerpt from the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec, Part 2, Chapter 6, Les Mières. Condemned to death by the Assize Court at Assini and executed on December 31st, 1857, evoked on January 29th, 1858. And so Kardec began with his questions. Evocation.
I'm here.
What are your feelings at seeing us?
Shame.
Did you remain conscious up to the last moment?
Yes.
Immediately after your execution, were you aware of your new existence?
I was plunged into great confusion, and I haven't yet come out of it. I felt a serene pain, and it seemed like it was my heart that suffered it. I saw something I couldn't recognize it roll at the foot of the scaffold. Then I saw blood flowing, and my pain became even more acute.
Was it a purely physical pain, similar to that caused by a serious wound, by the amputation of a limb, for example?
No, it was more like remorse, a great mental pain.
When did you start feeling it?
As soon as I was free.
Was the physical pain caused by the execution felt in your body or in your spirit?
The mental pain was in my spirit. My body felt the physical pain, but my spirit, separated from the body, also felt the physical pain.
Did you see your mutilated body?
I saw something formless, which seemed I was still part of. However, I felt myself intact outside of it. I was myself.
What impressions did this sight make on you?
I felt my pain a lot. I was completely lost in it.
Is it true that the body still continues to live for a few moments after being beheaded, and that the execution victim remains conscious of his thoughts?
The spirit withdraws little by little. The more the material ties interlace it, the less prompt its separation.
Some have said that they have seen an expression of anger and physical movements on certain execution victims' faces, as if they wanted to speak. Is that an effect of nervous contractions or an actual act of the will?
Of the will, since the spirit hasn't left yet.
What did you feel first upon entering your new existence?
Unbearable suffering, a sort of acute remorse whose cause I didn't know.
Did you find yourself in the company of your accomplices who were executed at the same time?
To our disgrace, yes. Seeing one another is constant torment. Each blames the others for his crime.
Have you encountered your victims?
I see them. They are happy. Their gaze persecutes me. I feel it piercing deep inside of me. I try to flee it in vain.
What feelings do you experience when you see them?
Shame and remorse. I myself caused it, but I still hate them for it.
What feeling do they experience at your sight?
Pity.
Do they display hatred and the desire for vengeance?
No. Their wishes are for my expiation. You can't imagine the horrible torture in owing everything to those we hate.
So do you regret your corporeal life?
I regret only my crimes. If I had it to do it all over again, I wouldn't succumb.
Was the penchant toward evil in your very nature, or were you influenced more by the environment in which you lived?
The tendency towards evil was in my very nature because I was an inferior spirit. I wanted to ascend too quickly and ask for more than I was capable of. I thought I was strong, and so I chose a tough trial. But I gave in to the temptations of evil.
If you had received a solid education, would you have bypassed a life of crime?
Yes, but I had chosen beforehand the conditions into which I was born.
Could you have become a moral man?
A weak man, incapable of doing either good or evil. During my life, I could have corrected the evil of my nature, but I could not have raised myself up to the good.
Do you believe in God while alive?
No,
Nevertheless, it is said that at the last moment you repented. Is that true?
I believe in a vengeful God. I was afraid of his justice.
And now is your repentance more sincere?
Alas, I can see what I have done.
What do you think about God now?
I sense him, but I don't comprehend him.
Do you think the punishment inflicted upon you on earth was just?
Yes,
Do you expect to be forgiven for your crimes?
I don't know.
How do you intend to redeem them?
Through new trials, but it seems like there is an eternity between them and me.
Where are you now?
I am in my suffering,
We mean, in what place?
right next to the medium.
Since you are here, in what form would you appear to us, if we could see you?
In my bodily form, my head separated from my body.
Could you appear to us?
No, leave me be.
Would you tell us how you escaped from the prison at Montdidier?
I don't know anymore. My suffering is so great that I have nothing but the memory of my crime. Leave me be.
Can we bring any relief to your suffering?
Pray for my expiation to come.
This is the case on La Mer from the book Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec, teaching us the other side of the story. If Booth was not totally repentant by the time Lincoln saw him in the afterlife, this one, Le Maire, showed to us exactly the same thing. In his case, he was already repentant, and he knew, as we said, the ladder of transformation, regeneration, has 3 steps. We need to repent, but it's not enough. And then naturally, we suffer because it's hard to know that we harmed and hurt other people. When that shift of our conscience has happened, we suffer naturally. And then there is a 3rd step. So we need to do the reparation. To repair means to build it again. And it needs to be rebuilt with ourselves, self-forgiving, and others. So to talk more about it, we are so honored to have Dr. Temoshok here. She is this very pioneering scientist. She is at the School of Medicine as a full professor at the University of Maryland. And she has been researching for many years in the field of, let's say, emotions and health, mostly in the biopsychosocial mediators of HIV progression. And she has been unveiling to us how coping styles can impact in the development of diseases or even in the recovery. And most importantly, for the show today, she shows to us that forgiveness is not only a virtue, but it is actually an emotion that can trigger physiological cascade of events. How so? We want to know more. That's why Dr. Temoshok is here with us to enlighten our minds so we can live a better life. Dr. Temoshok, thank you for being with us again. And we want to know more. We've heard and learned from your research that there is an increasing evidence that forgiveness may be beneficial to our health. Overall, it shows that it improves cardiovascular function, for example, to those who are very ill. Can you tell us more about the health benefits and the findings that you found specifically to forgiveness?
I'd be delighted. The science of forgiveness has been the subject of several books by a number of investigators and a number of editors and writers in this field, and it's been very interesting to show the commonalities among some of these studies. But the thing that I've been looking at, which also intersects with these other studies, is, as you say, how forgiveness or non-forgiveness triggers physiological events that then have this cascade of processes that either influences disease processes in a positive way or in a negative way. And all of the research has shown that if you don't forgive, if you hold on to these angry, vengeful thoughts, it leads to a conscious state of perseveration. You're dwelling, you're belaboring, you're going over, you're regurgitating, all of those kind of negative words, the events of if we're talking about not forgiving another person, say, or even not forgiving yourself, that these thoughts keep on in your mind, and that these have physiological roots, so that your heart rate keeps going up, your blood pressure keeps up. The more you perseverate, the more you dwell on these things, the more these physiological processes keep on being activated. And just as I was saying before about the pro-inflammatory cytokines and these processes that keep on activating the immune system, if you keep on doing it with no resolution, with no turning off, the body starts to break down. The body is not meant to go on in a state of activation where you have activated heart rate, activated blood pressure, activated immune system. You're going to break down. In the immune system range, you're going to develop more autoimmune functions. In the context of HIV/AIDS, immune activation actually stimulates the virus to reproduce, and so on. And so the question is, how can you get the mind to start turning off some of these processes that are just running rampant and activating the body in very negative ways? It's like revving up your car, and you have it in neutral, but you're stepping on the gas. It's just going on and on and on. It's not going to be good for the car, and it's certainly not good for the body. Forgiveness is one way that you can start to turn off those processes. You can sort of resolve them. You can get them to come to a homeostatic closure, and that's a easy thing to say, not an easy thing to do. But my research has shown that when people genuinely forgive, and the key is the word genuine, they either genuinely forgive another person for something that they've done to them. In the case of some of the people I've talked to who have HIV/AIDS, if they forgive the person who infected them, for example, and it's a very genuine feeling. Then you break this cycle. You break this cycle of perseveration, and the person's physiology starts to get more regulated, and that is going to be good for your physiology. It's going to be good for your immune system, and it's going to be good for your coping with disease.
So when we talk about homeostasis, we're talking about balance. We're talking about this mind and body balance. And science has this evidence that forgiving, and you say genuinely forgiving. What are the signs that we would say scientifically you can tell somebody genuinely forgave?
Well, one of the problems with forgiveness is that it's a very talked about concept. I mean, the Bible talks about it, society talks about it, the legal system talks about it. So there's a great deal of pressure on people to say that they forgive. And yes, they say, "Oh yes, I've forgiven," and they really haven't. And it's that kind of disparity between how you really feel and whether you've really done it that makes for either a rebalancing, a homeostatic rebalancing of the physiological system, or whether you're going to keep on perseverating. If your conscious mind is saying to the world, "Yes, I forgive," but your body is still going on with this perseveration, so so your heart rate is still going, and your blood pressure is still going, and your immune system is still overactivated, you haven't resolved it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no way of fooling the body. There's no way. So that's why you have to break through some of those kind of societal pressures to prematurely say, or to socially desirably say, yes, I've forgiven.
Yeah, it sounds like science is helping us to go to the root of the matter when it comes to emotions, especially forgiveness. We can't cheat the system.
Exactly,
the theology, you can't fool it, as you said. You can't. You need to face it or else, right?
Exactly, and to resolve it. And some of the resolving it is hard. It takes a multi-dimensional kind of intervention, and that involves the spiritual links, as you've been talking about. It involves psychological links, and it may even involve biofeedback. A lot of people aren't convinced that they hold these kinds of perseverative, angry emotions, unforgiving emotions in their mind. So sometimes what I've had to do with folks is to hook them up with monitors for their heart, for their blood pressure, for their skin temperature and other things to show how, when they talk about someone who's done them wrong, they continue to have these physiological processes, and they can see in front of them the monitor showing how their heart rate is still going high and their blood pressure is still high. And then they say, whoa, I guess I haven't. I go, no, let's talk about this. And when you become consciously aware that you haven't forgiven genuinely, that's when you can do the work of trying to resolve it. But you need to have that awareness first. You need to break through those societal demands that we say we forgive so that we can work through our processes, our feelings of anger, our other feelings. There's nothing wrong with feelings of anger. I mean,
exactly.
But you work through them. You need to work through them, and everyone's going to benefit from working through them. And first of all, you.
Exactly.
The person who forgives is going to have the benefits of a transformed mind, and there's the possibility maybe of a renewed relationship with that person who did you wrong, but maybe not. It doesn't matter as much as being able to have that transformation, that resolution of those feelings of anger and resentment.
Yeah, you're right, and we've come from generations of repression of emotions. People, you agree with that, right? The generations after generations, we were not taught to either face them or allow them to be transformed. It's probably we are in the first few generations, if not the first or the few first ones, to be proposed to face emotions as a natural physiological mechanism and propose some form of transformation. As we've said, there are no schools of emotion to teach us or coach us in real life how to do. What do you think about it?
Well, I think there's starting to be some people who are doing interventions to get us to understand our emotions. One of my mentors at the University of California, San Francisco, Professor Paul Ekman, who's now Professor Emeritus, has done a great deal of work on understanding facial expressions of emotion and really looking at when someone is either lying deliberately or is even lying unconsciously, which is the same as repression, and how that looks, and how you can, by teaching the person to recognize what emotions they're feeling, as well as maybe recognize the emotions in someone else, you can learn more about uncovering the way you really feel, accepting that, and working through it. Emotions are not your enemy. I mean, an angry emotion is there from an evolutionary sense because someone has harmed us. Sometimes it's right to stand up for someone who's either harming us or is causing injustice and so on. There's nothing wrong with an angry emotion, but society doesn't like angry emotions. Fear is there. There's nothing wrong with fear. Fear is there to have us run from situations that look very dangerous. Sadness. There's nothing wrong with sadness. Little boys for generations up until now are taught, well, don't cry. Big boys don't cry. However, you repress that, you have a problem with the body saying, well, I haven't resolved that. And you can't resolve it by repressing it. All that does is put it off in a little box, and it's going to be reopened. It's going to be reopened whenever you have another situation like that. And that's some of the basis, theoretically, for the post-traumatic stress disorder that is now much in the news and in science of saying when typically soldiers or people who are suffering great traumatic events, people who are victims of crime, etc., when they have something like that, which occurs, a trauma, of course, a huge number of emotions are triggered, as well as physiological responses. And that sometimes it's just too much for the body to cope with. It's too much for the mind to cope with. These are sometimes overwhelming traumas. We're talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about war. We're talking about all of those traumas. And then it gets put into a box, but the box is very vulnerable to being opened at any time that something resembles that situation. That's why sometimes with post-traumatic stress victims, hearing a car exhaust explode, which sounds like a gun, or hearing firecrackers, which sounds like a gun, they all of a sudden start shaking uncontrollably, and they, and at the worst have hallucinations that someone is out to get them, and that's the extreme situation where emotions and physiological responses have been put away in a box and not resolved.
We have a question here by Marcos D. Clay from Canada. He's asking in the chat room, how do we turn our immune system or those inflammations that you mentioned off through our mental state? Is there a scientific finding or strategy that was proposed as an intervention in that regard?
Okay. The question of turning off is not the one I want to focus on. The question is, how do we have our immune system functioning optimally? And we're not interfering with it. We want our immune system to do its job. We want our immune system to go after pathogens, whether they're bacteria or viruses or injuries, and to do its job. We just don't want the mind to keep on keeping those processes going after it's turned off. And the best way to do that is, in other words, you want to keep things in balance. And so it's not a question of on or off. It needs to be on appropriately and then off appropriately. Being consciously aware of things is always the first step. So that if you're aware that you're feeling sick, don't power on. don't keep on drinking coffee and taking Advil and other chemicals that are going to kind of mess up your body's processes. Let your body do its own thing to deal with the infections, and your body's telling you, hey, I need some rest. So get some rest. Take off. Don't power on. Give your body a chance to resolve this physical problem. That's probably the best way for it to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. We have also Jay here. He's going to ask you a question live. Hi, Jay, from Canada. Please welcome to Kardec Radio.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks so much for letting me be part of your show.
Sure, thank you.
I have a question for you, Doctor. My question is that what about the spiritual aspects of forgiveness that science cannot measure, such as love, things like that, karmic past? Have you gone into that realm?
That's a very good question. One of the real challenges that I've tried to deal with in my whole career is, how to measure complex concepts like that. Like love, how do you measure that? Really hard to do. How do you measure forgiveness? And that's been one of the problems with kind of detractors. They say, well, how can you measure something as complex as that? And spiritually, how do you measure concepts of belief? And you can't do that by a questionnaire. You can't just say, well, how much do you believe in God, 1 to 10? How much do you have a spiritual understanding of things? You can't do that. The way that I have tried to get at some of these complex concepts has been through writing little stories. I call them vignettes, or maybe a paragraph long, describing a person acting in a certain way, thinking in a certain way, interacting in a certain way, and then asking the person at the end of it, how similar are you to that person? So in terms of, like, say, forgiveness, there's lots of different levels of forgiveness. In the context of HIV/AIDS, a lot of folks who have been infected blame God. They don't forgive God for doing that. So one of our vignettes, trying to see, well, does someone forgive God for giving them HIV, is to write a little vignette that says something along the following lines. Roger felt that God was punishing him, and so on. And then you write, and then you say, Roger felt abandoned by God. Roger felt that he had done something wrong that had made God angry, which is how he got HIV/AIDS. How similar are you to Roger on a scale of 1 to 10? And then this turns out to be pretty predictive of how a person really feels. Scientifically, I'm getting around the social desirability thing. I'm not asking, what do you think? I'm saying, how similar are you to Roger? And so this, by this research, I've been able to show how the level of unforgiving God, or not forgiving God, not forgiving the person who infected you, etc., can make a difference.
Thank you, Jay, for your question. Thank you for being with us at Kardec Radio. Dr. Temoshok, so what are the frontier research proposals or perspectives for the science of forgiveness today?
I think the next step, after we've shown that, yes, certainly how we think about the person or ourselves who is forgiven or not forgiven, or degrees of forgiveness, after we've shown how that affects the body, we need to say, how can we intervene? Mm-hmm. What can we do to get the person to transform that kind of negative energy, negative emotions, perseverative emotions, really, unrecognized emotions? How can we get them to transform that to be more positive? And can we do that in a way that's consistent, with, the person's spiritual beliefs, mm-hmm. And so forth? And I think that's a real challenge. And I think that these kind of multi-dimensional interventions really need to be developed, and we can't just do that from the point of view of psychology, but I think by engaging people who are working from the perspective of faith as well as working from the perspective of science, we can do both things. We can combine the positive forces of both those kinds of interventions to help someone to transform some of these perseverative, rehashing emotions into renewal and a fresh start.
Yeah, Dr. Temoshok, we're going to give a minute break, and we'll be right back with you because we have Anna from Connecticut very soon ask you a very interesting question about DNA clearing forgiveness. We'll be right back.
We will return to our program after these messages.
If you have any questions or comments, please call Kardec Radio at 858-769-4705.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book Missionaries of the Light by the Spirit Andrea Luis, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today. Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the Spirit Andrea Luis, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.ediceiofamerica.com today.
And now we return to our program.
The show today is about the science of forgiveness. There is a science backing us up, telling us that there is evidence that if we forgive, we're healthier. We want to be healthier. And we in Spiritism, we know we bring baggage from previous lives as well. So this forgiveness is something so deep, something that we work at different levels, and science is teaching us the underpinnings of it, how our physical body is triggered by these forgiving mode. There's a lot to research. There's a lot of evidence already out there. And Dr. Temoshok is here with us sharing the many different findings that can help us understand that forgiveness is not simply something of the religious realm. It's actually something of our human nature. Could we tell Dr. Temoshok that we are physically wired to forgive?
Are you asking me that question?
Yes, I am.
I believe that we are. Yes, because this is part of humans living together. If humans had not been programmed to seek justice, to protect the family, to live in peace, we wouldn't be surviving in societies. And forgiveness, in that sense, is part of our evolutionary history. If every time somebody smacked us on the head, we continued to hold grudges against that person and to go back and smack that person on the head and so on, we'd end up in a situation, which is unfortunately we have, such as in the Middle East, where you have these spiraling cycles of hatred and non-forgiveness, where someone's killed someone else's relatives and then you kill their relatives and so on. That is not good for mankind.
Exactly. So we are talking about being wired to have these social bonds, and forgiveness is a part of it. So science is very likely going to tell us in the near future more about it. And we would just want to share with our dear listener that tonight at 6 p.m., we're going to have a special session at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore Center on the Spiritist view on these natural disasters. Irene is stopping by on the East Coast, as we called the Angel Irene, is going to bring us some form of transformation. And in that regard, we're going to explain the spiritual side of the story. Why is this necessary for us? Is there a spiritual transformation behind it? Why? Just log in at the Spirit Society of Baltimore website, and we're going to webcast live if you're not in the area. And We're talking about forgiveness because in a few weekends, America is going to recall September 11. We are going to think about what happened 10 years ago. And many people still have a hard time coping with the implications of the disaster, and also especially forgiving. Should we forgive those terrorists? How does that happen in a collective realm? Dr. Temoshok, one more question to you before we open the line for Anna from Connecticut. When we talk about forgiveness, has any research already touched the realm of collective forgiveness? Is there anything out there telling us the possible difference between individual forgiveness and the collective forgiveness? For example, the American nation, in regard to the forgiveness to those, for example, let's say that created such a disaster on September 11, 2001. What do you think, Dr. Temoshok?
I think that's a wonderful question and a terribly important issue. There has not been, to my knowledge, any particular science about that. I mean, there are people who are conducting surveys, who are trying to understand how the mood, how the attitudes and beliefs of Americans and people in other countries have changed or transformed over time. But all they've done is kind of sort of tapped into that. They've asked, how are you feeling? What do you think about 9/11 now, and so forth. But not anything more scientific than that. I think there are a number of people who've written very, very movingly about that, and there have been some very, very important films and documentaries about forgiveness, and I think that some of those are giving us food for thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something to, some more work to be done in the near future, hopefully. So, Dr. Temoshok, we're going to open the line to Anna from Connecticut, who has an interesting question for you. Hi, Anna. Welcome to Kardec Radio.
Hi there.
Thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Yeah, my name is Ann from Connecticut, and I guess my question was, because I had done some work with someone from Peru, Inca work, that what about clearing? Like when you're clearing your own DNA, and it's supposed to be clearing current generations and previous generations. It's some people within that are still living within my family, for instance, who are very ill, have life-threatening illness, and do not even want to discuss the possibility that their change in thought could impact the outcome of their healing. Is healing yourself clearing other generations? Is it impacting this at all, this illness, when the person refuses to discuss how anything could impact the outcome? And I truly believe that it's related to forgiveness. I think and I specifically think I know which relationship it is, but that, again, it's like it's none of my business. I'm going to put it that way. I don't know if I'm making that clear or not.
Yeah, and thank you so much for asking this question. And there are we're going to relay it to Dr. Temoshok, but I want to recall that there are many families, as you said, that have experiences, including with forgiveness, that they go through a process of resistance also onto forgiving, for example, problems between families, different families, or also regarding disease patterns, etc., and there is a relationship. What do you think, Dr. Temoshok? There is something out there. Is there something already there in that realm of clearing DNA?
Okay, I think there are a lot of different questions here. I mean, certainly the memory and growing up, the social influences are very, very powerful influences that can't be denied, and it may look a lot in some of those cases as if it's so strong an influence as to be genetically or DNA related, It's really the power of how you cope from when you're an infant, and how you deal with things as an infant. They've done a lot of studies of mice and monkeys and so forth who have been subjected to stress, and how that sets their stress response so that it's triggered very quickly and very dysfunctionally for the rest of their lifetime. So it looks a lot like it's DNA related. Now, that having been said, there's a whole science now of epigenetics, which is talking about how experiences that we have in the world can get incorporated into the DNA, or how experiences can set off and trigger genes to respond in a certain way. So it's kind of both things, and that this is very exciting and very new science. And one thing I would like to really delve into next is to how any kind of experience can turn on or turn off a gene, and some of these genes can be cancer genes. I mean, the oncogenes they're called, and they're probably a huge host of these kinds of genes and proclivities to either positive mental states, negative mental states, positive disease processes, negative disease processes, and what is there that turns those genes on and off to start some of these processes, physiological processes, unrolling and cascading? It's a very good question.
Dr. Temoshok, thank you for your answer, and thank you, Anne, for being here with us. So now, Dr. Temoshok, we have these the ultimate question that some of our audience, the Spiritist audience, want to ask you about your experience of with the Peace in You Award with Evaldo Franco in 2010, and how did you feel about that experience of receiving the award and interacting with the community, the Spiritist community in the Maryland area?
Well, it was very moving, and I felt extremely honored, and it also opened up a new realm for me, in the sense that this is a whole movement. It's very, very important, very interesting, that I had not previously been aware of. And I think it opens up, in terms of my thinking, the idea about energy. And I've been concerned, of course, with how energy in the sense of emotions, in terms of body functioning, et cetera, is processed and transformed during our lifetime. It's sort of saying, how about energy in this other realm? And so I think it's very, very interesting, and it really opened up a whole new world for me.
Thank you, Dr. Temoshok. So when we talk about back again to the science of forgiveness and the verge of the memory on September 11, is there anything that you would say for everybody, not only for the case specific to the American reality, but overall for all of our listeners everywhere and elsewhere in the world, because Kardec Radio has listeners in more than 40 countries by now. What could you tell that science today can give us? We're not talking about a miraculous recipe for forgiving, but what would be the main step for somebody who needs to walk into this healthier state of the mind of forgiveness?
Again, I think that the first step has to be a very open recognition, opening yourself up to really being more conscious of your thoughts, your feelings, and your body experiences. Don't discount something. If you have a little trigger, a little intuition about something, don't discount that. That's very important. You may not be able to put that into words, but you need to say, I wonder why I have that little trigger. I wonder why I have that pain in my foot. I wonder, let me think about that more. And the more we think about something, the more we, try to understand it. I think understanding is the first step to anything. I wonder why I feel such anger toward this person. As you begin to think about it more, it will naturally evolve into understanding more about the other person. The more you can understand the other person, or the other persons in the sense of terrorists or whatever, it's harder and harder and harder to think of that person as alien.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very hard to, and that's why sometimes the legal system is very strange when you talk about is somebody guilty when they have killed somebody, and you say, well, okay, they had a very difficult childhood where they were abused and so forth, and okay, but they still consciously decided to do that. But it's not so legally. The legal system goes on its own way. However, in your own mind, you can understand about that person. You can understand what made that person do what they did. And understanding is always going to, I think, open the door to forgiveness.
Understanding, right. Dr. Temoshok, we have here one more question for you from the chat room of Kardec Radio. Our co-host, Kirsten DeMello, is here with us to relay the question to you. Hi, Kirsten. Thank you. Please bring it in.
Sure. Okay. The question was posed, like you said, by one of our chat room members, and the question was about HIV and forgiveness therapy. And since Dr. Temoshok has studied emotions, maybe she could talk a little bit about emotional healing with chronically ill patients. And have you experienced chronically ill patients have an emotional healing that ultimately had an effect on their physical health?
Oh, thank you for that question. It's something I've really worked on in my therapy with people who have both cancer and HIV. Again, it's a contribution to a health and disease process. To say that if you can work through something, it's always going to be better. If you can rebalance your physiological system, if you can rebalance your immune system so that it's working the way it's supposed to work, as nature intended it to work, to fight disease processes, to fight pathogens, etc., so that your mind is not impeding that process. So the more you can let go of these kind of unhealthy emotions, which I would call these perseverative emotions of unforgiveness, the more one can work that through, the better. And I've worked with a lot of people who have HIV/AIDS, and just as an example, a lot of folks come from very dysfunctional families. The parents have been abusive, they've had a very rough childhood, etc. I think recognizing the limitations of one's parents, it's not like these people were evil. They had their limitations growing up. They had their limitations as parents, and to say, yeah, I'm sorry, they had a tough life too. They did their best. They're limited. I'm going to interact with them to the extent that I can. And that sometimes it's that coming together and saying, okay, I'm just going to enjoy this family reunion. I'm not going to expect that people are going to be wonderful to me, but we're going to interact to the extent that we're able. And that has made a huge difference for folks. It's made a huge difference to be able to understand, again, the limitations of those around us, to say nobody's perfect, You're not perfect. They're not perfect. And to forgive those. To say, yes, you're limited. You're not a perfect parent. I'm not a perfect child. You're not a perfect spouse. I'm not a perfect spouse, etc. But we're going to have a good interaction, a positive interaction, to the extent that we're able, and that's made a big difference.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirsten, for relaying that question. Is there any other question you want to relay right now?
Not at this moment. Actually, I do have a personal question. I was curious as to how in the scientific community, when you began to do these types of research, did you have any type of backlash from your fellow colleagues? Because it seems like a lot of people, especially when it comes to emotions and things of this nature, people become a little bit skeptical about it.
Well, yes, and some of these backlashes continue on to today, although it's less so. But a lot of times, we're not exactly fighting, but there's a wall there from the kind of strictly biomedical providers, doctors, or researchers who want to believe that the mind has no influence whatsoever. We give someone a pill, and it solves things. So that a lot of the problems I've had have been with these very, unidimensional medical folks who don't want to see the multidimensional aspect of things. The best doctors in the world, as everyone knows, are those who look holistically at health, who understand that a person's health has to do also with the mind and with the social relationships, not just with the body, and that giving someone a pill is not going to work. And I've seen that a lot with HIV/AIDS, for example, that some of the HIV docs have said, okay, I don't understand. My patients are not taking these really transformative HIV medications. Why aren't they taking them? They know that this is the only thing that's going to work to keep their HIV under control. Why aren't they taking them? And so I've had some problems in trying to communicate. Well, okay, there's a mental aspect to this. There's a reason sometimes, not a logical reason, but a emotional reason why people aren't taking their HIV meds as they, quote, should. And some of that is the person doesn't forgive themselves.
Yes.
And there are a lot of reasons for that. So I think some of these issues go on today where people think that there's a magic pill. Some of these medicines work wonderfully. But if people don't take them for other reasons, then it's not going to resolve the person's illness.
So, Dr. Temoshok, we know you've written the book, The Type C Connection, which is very interesting. Is there something coming up in regard to the science of forgiveness for the public?
We are in the midst of trying to publish our latest research. We had a 5-year study of progression of HIV and the factors that are contributing to that. And so we're trying to have that come out. I have just written a chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Health Psychology on HIV/AIDS, which includes some of this biopsychosocial research and summarizing not only my work but the work of others in the field. Mm-hmm. This just came out in 2011, published by Howard Friedman in the Oxford Handbook of Health Psychology. It has a number of other chapters which are very, very interesting on cancer and other diseases as well. So I think that there's going to be more and more research coming out, and my research on the forgiveness and these other factors, will be coming out in journals first, and then will be summarized, hopefully in a book that will be coming out in the next couple of years.
Great. We're looking forward to that, and you can count on our support because our audience already is very grateful to your efforts. It's so important. We would say what you bring to us is life-saving, for sure, to say the least. Thank you, Dr. Temoshok, for being with us and for spending this time enlightening ourselves with so much that science already bringing to reinforce the need to work on these emotion, virtue, whatever we name it, forgiveness. Thank you for being with us.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity to interact with this marvelous audience and with you.
Thank you. So this show is about the science of forgiveness. Share this news with your family and friends because this show is going to be on demand at kardecradio.com and also at Blog Talk Radio /Kardec Radio. We need to forgive. And it's all about learning. We are here to learn. If we don't master it, don't punish yourself because you need to work on self-forgiveness. We all do. And this show was about cases on forgiveness as well. We have President Lincoln and the account on his passing to the spiritual realm and how he awoke in the spiritual realm and actually was present at the moment in which his murderer, Booth, was departing to the spiritual realm. The encounter, and most important, how he forgave Booth and started mentoring him. Can you believe it? It's mind-blowing. And then later, we also saw the case of the spirit La Mer, who was in France in the 19th century, a criminal, and his transformation in the afterlife, talking to us that just like President Lincoln, he was forgiving. He was forgiven by his victims. And this is so interesting. Forgiveness is something that possibly we can tell beyond the physical features. Science is telling us that this feeling impacts on our physiology. In Spiritism, we give that other step also to teach us that it's a spiritual, it has a spiritual effect on our spiritual body. To know more about this and how we evolve into realms, the evolution into worlds, the study course every Thursday at the Spiritist Society of Baltimore, live webcast at 7 p.m. every Thursday. And in a few weeks, actually in a month, we have Dr. Stephen Post, Dr. Petrillo, myself, and Adriano Barbo in a special event in New York right in front of the United Nations. We have It's Good to Be Good, all the research and much more on the science of being good. Can you believe it? If you're good, you are healthier. It's going to be September 25th. If you want more information, just log in mvsc.org and get to know more. The upcoming show on September 3rd, in 1 week, to celebrate Labor Day and prepare ourselves for much more in life. We need to talk about the difficulties in life. What about people who are on the edge of suicide? Is there a way to help them out? Yes, there is. We have the 1-800-SUICIDE hotline, and we're going to bring to the show the founder of that hotline, Age Reese Butler II. We're going to be honored to have him join us, as well as the author of the book, Those Left Behind, Justara Korngold from New York, who is going to be with us to teach us about the consoling features of the Spiritist therapy for those who departed to the spiritual realm in such a dramatic way, in a suicide mode, and those who stayed here, what should they do? So let us work on this together. We have so much more, but this is the end for the show today. Thank you, dear listener, and let us pray this weekend for all those who are here in the East Coast or elsewhere. Let us pray today because America is being challenged by the Hurricane Irene. Let us understand more about it. Tonight at the Spirit Side of Baltimore Center, we're going to have a special session on the Spiritist view on natural disasters, and we're going to promote a special prayerful mode to help everyone. So these can be a learning experience for all of us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in a week.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.